We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Saqi Mehta. She is the Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at GoodRx. Saqi, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly we answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, I'm Saqi Mehta. I go by she, her, and really excited to be here today for this conversation. So thank you. I can go into my background a little bit more in a bit, but it's really non-traditional. At the bottom of it, I think I'm just really passionate about all things education and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when I was younger, I wanted to be a journalist. I might be dating myself a little bit, but it was the era of Oprah in her heyday. It was like 4 o'clock. It was like everyone stopped everything to watch her. And Peter Jennings was on the evening news. So I loved that concept of getting to the truth of something and really focusing on other people and their experiences. And I actually see a lot of threads in the work that I do today from then.
I love that answer. I also used to watch Oprah and Ellen and very many of the shows that came on during daytime TV as well. So I feel like I'm living out that kind of dream right now by interviewing folks like you as well who are doing great work. You fast forward to today. How has your personal journey really led you to be Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, specifically at GoodRx?
Yeah, so I have a really winding kind of road to where I am now. The running joke is like no one really starts their life journey thinking, oh, I'm going to end up being a professional in people or human resources, but it is a wonderful place to be. So just for some background, I initially thought I was going to get a PhD in clinical psychology and be a therapist. And again, a lot of threads to what I see today, but didn't want to spend, frankly, 6 to 8 years in school. And then I was like, well, I still want to be in counseling in some sort and really work with people, but in a little bit more of a shorter term capacity. So then I went into higher education, first doing research and then as a trained career counselor. So I went to school in Boston and then stayed around there. So I worked at MIT, Harvard Business School, meeting with students. And I really loved like helping them on their journey. And then I would see things like career fairs and just seemed really like interesting and dynamic. So wanted to see the flip side and being embedded in industry. So ended up doing that at Disney for a year, but also largely in tech companies like VMware, Square, Cloudera, Divi, and now GoodRx where I am. And I think a lot of times when you see a lack of something is when you think you can do something to help improve. So I was largely in the recruiting space. We were talking to our women in tech at Square. This is now back in 2012, my gosh, 10 years ago, talking about our presence at Grace Hopper, largest women in tech conference in the world. And I could probably count on less than two hands the number of women engineers that we had. And it was just kind of, shocking. And I was like, oh, this is not something that I'm used to coming from higher education or places like Disney that were very large and very, global and diverse. And so just again, thought there was more I could do in that space. And so it's really organically kind of evolved since then. It's about representation of hiring a diverse workforce, but certainly after people join a company, how are you setting them up for success? How are we thinking about promotion, succession, mentorship, all of the different like facets of a person's evolution at a job. And so, yeah, landed at GoodRx and really, really love it. I've been there for just about 2 months. So just starting my journey there as well, but it's been wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your path to this work and kind of your excitement around working at GoodRx as well. You mentioned Grace Hopper and the importance of representation and just having an opportunity to really improve upon something as well. From your perspective as a kind of practitioner and your experience, what is the role of private and public employers to really create more equity in the world?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think regardless of whether you're private or public, it's really the same. It's essentially to make sure that people feel like they can be their authentic self. And so I mentioned kind of the full life cycle of an employee. So from the moment that we're engaging with a candidate, whether they get a job or not, we should be treating them with utmost respect, even as an individual, certainly, but also as a potential client or customer. And then going through the entire process and making sure that we're not looking at a culture fit or trying to put someone in a box, but a culture add. How are are they, bringing more, enhancing the current environment that we're in. And then once someone starts with us, again, how are we supporting them for success? So looking at promotions or succession planning, making sure that they feel comfortable, right? How are we including them in culture? So employee resource groups or community resource groups, are we promoting that? Are we having people really join and be able to be communal? And then certainly if people do decide to leave, that we're making sure that we're having like a full circle there, and so that they understand that we still want to help them in their future journey, no matter where they go.
Yeah, it's definitely a holistic experience there as well, from the time someone is a candidate to their employee experience at every part of their journey through professional development, promotion cycles, succession planning, and when they become alumni of the organization too. I definitely want to talk about kind of empowering folks to do their best work too. Where did you start in kind of helping to build GoodRx's diversity, equity, and inclusion goals?
Yeah. So when I started 2 months ago, so I'm stepping into a brand new role, and I appreciate that they prioritize the work. And so I really delved into an active listening tour the first 30 days. I've seen leaders that I greatly admire do that. You ask, a simple set of like 3 questions to get varied feedback. So what's going well? What could we improve on? What do you want me to know or focus on? And so really met with a cross function of folks, and, wanted to understand kind of the current state of things. And then from there, kind of iterated on a number of work streams or focus areas. And I actually was just at headquarters last week in Santa Monica presenting out my entire strategy. And I have around 6 different work streams that I've developed. And so the whole plan is to launch it at Q1 and just to get everything in place. So we're much more in the kind of starting phases of our DE&I journey. And I'm really here, I feel like, to help rally and bring ideas forward, both from leadership, so top down, and bubbling from the bottom up as well.
Absolutely. I definitely agree that it starts with kind of that active listening and to understand kind of where you're going and the goalposts there. It's important to understand what the foundation is and where you are today too, what people care about as well. Was there anything that surprised you during the listening tour? If so, what were kind of some of the insights there?
Yeah, so it's interesting, when I was putting together my strategy, the number 6 really evolved or emerged a lot. And so I'm a fan of like numerology, and I looked up like the meaning of the number 6. And so it's indicative of flow, of stability, and, positivity. So I took that as hopefully a promising sign. But in terms of insights, there were things around psychological safety. So I don't love to say safe space. I like brave space, because not everyone has the ability to be safe. But essentially, how do you speak without fearing repercussions? Things around accountability and transparency. Who are we? What do we stand for? Especially being like a healthcare tech company, obviously in the past couple of years, especially, things have really evolved, and it's so top of mind, right? And our mission is very simple: to make healthcare more affordable, prescription healthcare to Americans. And so how do we, continue on that journey and really live up to our values? Things around community, certainly. So formulating CRGs or ERGs will be really, really important. And so just in general, like, how do we make sure that we're supporting one another? I think what's been surprising in a pleasant way is that people are really passionate about this work. And so they just really, really deeply care. I've had people be very vulnerable, and I so appreciate it. It's hard to do, especially with a new person on the team, but people have just really been open and sharing like how they feel and how much they really want to do good in the community. And so people really want to help support one another, which I really love. And so that makes the work so much more fulfilling, because we're starting from a place of a healthy appetite versus, oh my gosh, it's just something else that we have to do to like check off a box.
Yeah, a great starting point, and psychological safety is definitely important to that as well, especially when you are giving or receiving feedback too, and feeling like you can raise your hand and be part of the company in different ways. And one of the ways you talked about too were ERGs or CRGs as well. And that's definitely come up in a lot of these conversations too, as a way for folks to really feel connected to an organization, to create those meaningful moments of kind of relationships as well. What role do community resource groups, CRGs, play in your company culture at GoodRx right now?
Yeah, so we haven't formally had any CRGs or ERGs yet. So I'm really, really excited to come in. And so that was part of a key element of my strategy. And I think that's the biggest win that we collectively can do together. So we're going to be launching five. So it's Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, LGBTQ plus, women, Black, Latinx, and there's one more that I'm like, but so I'm sorry, those are the five that we're launching initially. And then not only are we going to have a lead for each of them that will have like a 6-month tenure, because we do recognize that it's very much like a full-time job on top of a day job. So how do we recognize that in some way, either a stipend or baked into performance, and giving different people the ability to rotate out and have that as a leadership capability to be a voice, to an entire community. It's a really big deal. We also will have executive sponsors for each of our CRGs. So someone from our leadership team to help just move cadence forward. It's not that they're necessarily attending every single meeting, but we also want to tie it into like an OKR. So for our women CRG, for example, maybe there's things that we can do around reproductive health, for example. So making sure that we are, addressing like a specific business need. And then finally, those CRGs will really be responsible for the voice. We have a DEI newsletter that we're curating monthly, but once we have that partnership, it'll largely be driven from them. But also intersectionality is so important. So just recognizing that, February is not the only month that we're going to talk about like Black people or, women in March. And so how do we usher in conversations that speak to a larger theme, such as a seat at the table, for example, is a theme that we've started that'll go into next year.
Yeah, it sounds like there are a lot of resources, executive sponsors, tools, and really the structure and framework in place to set people up for success in CRGs as well, and really make sure that you're creating those opportunities for folks to be a voice as well in terms of leads and community members too. I also want to ask kind of the other ways you are creating those meaningful connections across the organization as well, if you want to share any examples with folks who are listening.
Yeah. So we operate in a hybrid model. We do have 3 offices, Santa Monica, SF, and New York, but we also have people who are remote and spread all across the United States. So it's just important at the end of the day for people to feel like they can have their authentic voice. And if you're familiar with Masterclass, for example, I really want to launch like a GoodRx Masterclass or Academy where there's so many things that we have interests or expertise levels in outside of our day-to-day. So concrete example, we have what we call a workplace experience team. And one of my amazing colleagues, his name is Ezekiel. And so he's at the coffee bar making these amazing lattes and drinks and whatnot. And he's just such a friendly, warm, inviting person that everyone knows that they can trust. And, it's a wonderful colleague. But on top of that, he's also an ASL interpreter. And so he's trained. He literally does events outside of work. He just did Celeste Ng's book signing. He did that. And so we didn't even know until we saw like a Slack about it. So things like that, like how do we bring out our outside interest to work, whether it's a 5-minute meditation, whether it's teaching someone a line of a language, stick figure drawing, whatever it can be. How do we share more of that and help each other feel more comfortable and just get to know each other more?
Absolutely. Getting to know each other more, learning each other's kind of superpowers, interests, and sharing that across the organization as well. We talked about CRGs, really creating those moments of connection. We know another part of this is leadership too, in every sense of the word, both formal and informal. It's not one person, your responsibility, one department's responsibility to ensure an entire organization is equitable. How do you empower folks across the organization to really practice equity-driven leadership in their day-to-day processes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for ICs or individual contributors, I think good ideas can come from anywhere. It doesn't matter if you're a manager or not, making an environment where everyone should feel comfortable in voicing ideas, concerns, having that kind of a feedback loop. Something that I propose is to have like a shadow board of directors. So before a board meeting, we have, let's say, 10 to 15 people who come together, again, across the organization, individual contributors who can help drive strategy or give feedback on a future launch. So just making sure we have continual lines of communication and decisions aren't being being made up here just in a bubble without other voices and perspectives included. And then for leaders to make sure that, just generally speaking, that we're thinking about people on our team equitably. It took me a little bit of time as a manager to realize that there's not always just like a one right thing to do, understanding that people have different motivations for different things, and different things motivate different people. Not every story can be about everyone. So that's why we just need a wider array of voices. So making sure that we're thinking about people in a diverse manner. And that's not just gender and ethnicity. It's about background, thought, experience, introverts versus extroverts, right? Are we calling on people? Are we giving them time to process sometimes ideas? It's not always about doing something immediately in a room. So just really kind of, wrapping your arms around what all that encompasses and making sure you're putting that into practice.
Yeah, I like that idea of like a shadow board of directors and really making sure you're having, like you were talking about too, a lot of voices and seats at the table as well to share that feedback. We've talked a lot about kind of those examples and actions, which are really important too. And I think during these conversations as well, a lot of folks kind of want to know, how do I know if I'm doing a good job? And kind of the question around measuring progress, because we know it's a continuous journey. What is your philosophy around measuring diversity, equity, and inclusion, belonging initiatives and strategies, knowing that we're not looking to check a box, but what gets measured really does get invested in?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with tech companies specifically, this is such a big area of focus and frankly a challenge sometimes. So when I worked at Disney, as you can imagine, like it's so much focus on the power of storytelling and the narrative and literally like the pixie dust that they talk about. And so I've brought that, or tried to bring that into many of my roles within specifically startups, to say data and numbers, obviously that's really important, but that should not be the primary driver. It should start with like the human connection and the story or outcome that we want, and how do we work backwards from there. So certainly from like a recruiting perspective, of course it's about, putting in strides, like going to things like Grace Hopper, so that we are making a commitment to having a more diverse workforce, and how do we reach, people of different backgrounds and perspectives. But it's also internally, like, how are we making sure again that we support our folks, and whether it's highlighting or spotlighting people's stories and understanding a little bit more about themselves, to doing like high potential, looking across our organizations to who are people that may have been overlooked in the past. There's a statistic that I always point to, that women apply to a job when they're 80% qualified, men apply when they're 20% qualified. And even knowing that, I've been guilty too. If there's 10 bullets in a job description, I'm like, have I done 8? Like, should I even, go for it? So really just speaking to people's potential, I think, is so important. And at the end of the day, we are going to be working on a report to showcase like what our commitment is. And the data is just one piece, but I think that call to action is also really important. So how are we looking forward? And especially in our journey at GoodRx, so much is going to happen in 2023. So it's really looking forward versus, yes, it's important to say where we are, but that's really just a snapshot and a picture in time, versus like, how are we going to be 1 year from now as well.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of looking at job descriptions in the past and also saying, I don't hit all of the criteria, so I can't apply as well. So I definitely believe that statistic, and, speaking to people's potential, really investing in folks for the long term is so important. I know you mentioned, where we are today is a snapshot in time. Where is GoodRx today in kind of that equity journey, and where would you like to be a year from now, knowing that every company and every person is, at a different stage?
Yeah, I think we're really at the foundational level at this point. Again, there's like really healthy appetite, which is wonderful. I think we just have to formalize and really build momentum to move things forward. So I see myself as really just a representative voice to help usher that kind of momentum. So all the strategy has been put together. We are looking to launch in Q1. So primarily everything is going to be, there's going to be something that's happening during every quarter. So really excited. Things like unconscious bias training, cultural competencies, interview training, launching our CRGs, having a report or more of like a regular cadence, tying in our work with, we have a wonderful social impact team too. So what are we doing externally in the community, and how are we then tying that into our internal efforts as well? And then just, from like a recruiting perspective, like what else are we doing in terms of sourcing or representing ourselves at events? And then in terms of community community, how do we continue to really build? We have wonderful teams who have, events where there's one today for like Halloween, and just how do we speak to all different, interests and pathways. And then mentorship, sponsorship, those are also things that we need to focus on, along with like brand. So our website, what is our call to action? What kinds of information are we putting on there? It's really the whole picture, but I'm very confident that a year from now we'll be in a very different state with a lot more robust programming. But it starts with the people, and the people are really fantastic. We just want to showcase them even more.
Yeah, it definitely starts with the people, and I appreciate you sharing a little bit around that foundation that is currently there and the strategy that you put together for the next few months and years too, and understanding kind of the difference that you can make as well in the lives of employees, the employer brand overall. Saqi, is there anything that I didn't specifically ask that you want to share with folks who are listening, or underscore any kind of key takeaways about this work?
Yeah, I think just that it's an ever evolving topic, right? There's not one endpoint. That's the reason, frankly, why I think every company has this as such an important focus, and that we don't want to be in a cancel culture. So there's some philosophical kind of guidelines that I provided to the company, and one of them is it's not a scarcity model, right? It's not that if one person is successful, that's to the detriment of other people. And I think sometimes it feels like there's only one spot, and so everyone's kind of working towards that kind of model. So just know that it's ever evolving, that we're all learning as we go. And we just want to, the more we learn and know, the more we grow together. So it's very much a collaborative effort, and it touches everyone. So it's just in everyone's best interest to be involved.
Absolutely. Everybody can be involved, not a scarcity mindset whatsoever. And it's okay not to have all the answers, have the growth mindset, and continue to move forward and make a difference. Saqi, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thank you so much. This was a pleasure.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood, and know it's a requirement for the business to really succeed overall. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.